today on Mother Mayhem.
But in those moments when you think that somebody is trying to tell you something that isn't true and isn't your version of events, or is trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do, it's okay to say, I see that you see that from this perspective. I believe you that you see this conversation from that point of view. I acknowledge that. I just want you to know that's not the way I see it. That isn't my version of events. That's not how I experienced it. And if the conversation persists and continues, you can say, oh, I know we disagree, and it's okay that we disagree. Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, a narcissistic abuse recovery podcast for daughters. Hi, I'm your host, Heather Gray. Thank you so much for joining me again in this conversation. I want to jump right in and pick up where we left off in our last episode. Last week, we talked about getting out of the cycle of people-pleasing and perfectionism. And as I led you through that conversation, I started a conversation with all of you around the importance of boundary setting. That's the conversation I want to continue with you today. And this isn't going to be a be-all and end-all conversation around boundaries, but I do hope that it lays the groundwork and foundation for how I think about boundaries, boundary setting, and its role in narcissistic abuse recovery. Last week, when we talked about people pleasing and perfectionism, I mentioned how oftentimes chronic people pleasers and perfectionists are told that they need to set better boundaries, but they have no clue as to where to begin. And that's because as growing up, you never had the opportunity to get to know yourself. You couldn't spend time understanding your preferences. You couldn't be curious about your own wants or needs. In fact, if you think about it, identifying your own needs would have been something that would be really vulnerable for you growing up. As you connected to needing something or needing someone, those needs would easily become weaponized by your mom. So when I start talking about identifying your needs and preferences, I recognize that for you, this is going to be a really big ask. And I hope that as you listen to previous episodes of the show and get to know me a little more, that you'll come to trust that I wouldn't have this conversation with you and I wouldn't be bringing any of this up if it wasn't really important. But it's not just important, it's really critical to healing and narcissistic abuse recovery. Now, in case you missed last week's episode, at the end of the episode, I offered a worksheet with journaling prompts you could use to start to explore with yourself your own needs and your own boundaries. And I'm going to go ahead and include a link to that worksheet in the show notes for today's episode as well. But as you start to connect to your own needs and your own boundaries, there's some questions you're going to need to consider, things you're going to want to check in with yourself on. I'm just going to offer a couple of examples from the worksheet that I created to just give you a sense of where I'm going, how I'm thinking about this, and how I'm organizing the material for you. So, for example, you might want to start asking yourself, when do I feel the most content and at peace? Which people or situations disrupt my peace? What do I crave more of in terms of emotional support, connection, or understanding? What are recurring or frustrating challenges in my life? What are my physical and mental well-being requirements? What do I need to feel physically and mentally? What do I need to feel safe and secure in my own environment? What personal boundaries of mine do I feel are being crossed or violated? I don't know if you've noticed or not, but I'm being pretty deliberate in starting this conversation with you and your needs. And this is because oftentimes the boundary conversation can be so reactionary. We're reacting to the things that someone has said, done, hasn't said, or hasn't done. And then we find ourselves having this emotional reaction. We find whatever they've said or done egregious or upsetting, and it creates this reaction in us. We want to shift the conversation around boundaries from you reacting to somebody else to you knowing your own needs and expectations of others and feeling confident in responding. Because when we're responding to other people, we're in the passenger seat of our own lives. But if we can get ourselves into the driver's seat by knowing what we think, what we want, what we need, and what we expect of others, we're going to feel more in control of ourselves, of our relationships, and what happens next in our own lives. Because here's the thing, the boundaries conversation, it is going to be an emotional one. It brings up feelings of fear. We get guilty. We feel shameful. We feel insecure because boundaries at their core, when we're setting them, we're telling somebody else, this is where you end and this is where I begin. And you're also inadvertently telling someone, hey, you want to be a little bit closer to me than I want to be to you. That is an intimidating conversation. And if you have run your entire life avoiding being difficult, avoiding conflict, avoiding saying no to anyone, you are going to find these conversations incredibly challenging. But I want to remind you that the consequence for not setting boundaries is also pretty gosh darn intimidating and challenging. We went into depth last week about not having those boundaries and how not having those boundaries when it comes to people pleasing and perfectionism can affect ourselves. It affects our energy level, our self esteem, the way we think about ourselves, the way we perceive ourselves moving through the world. And you heard me talk too in earlier episodes about how poor boundaries are a sign or a symptom of disconnecting from yourself. And it's hard to have a better relationship with yourself when you're prioritizing the needs of others. And that's why this conversation we're having today matters. I know that a lot of you are sick and tired of being told boundaries every single time the narcissistic abuse recovery topic comes up, but this is why it's so critical. Because some of you have never considered your needs or preferences before. So when you say, I don't know what my boundaries are, you actually mean it. However, for some of you too, you do know what your boundaries are. You absolutely know them. You just don't know how to communicate them. And that's a little bit different. Communicating boundaries will always come down to your personal style or preference. But a really good way to start thinking about it is to first remember that there's no way to deliver a boundary that guarantees that a person will agree with it, understand it, and immediately respect it. Our success with boundaries has such little to do with the other person or situation and way more to do with our own response. We can't guarantee that someone's not going to be angry with us. You can't guarantee that someone's not going to be hurt. And we can't guarantee that someone won't cross the line the second you deliver the boundary. That's just not a reason not to do it. Now, some of you probably know if you've been in the personal development space for any amount of time, you might know that quote from Maya Angelou: when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Someone's response to you and your boundaries is so much more about them than it is about you, and it gives you all the information you need to know about them. But when it comes to communicating our boundaries and talking to people about our personal limits, I have my own golden rule. And that's when I teach communication, I am asking people and challenging people to show people who you are so they believe you the first time. So for me, what that means when it comes to communication, it means that instead of worrying about what someone thinks or how they might be perceiving you, you're going to tell them what you want them to think and what you need them to know. So you might start your boundary conversation maybe with an empathy statement because you want to clearly communicate that you're not just simply armored up and walled off. You might want to say, I really care about the things you care about. I know that this project is really urgent for you. I understand that you have really high expectations for what you need to happen next. Then, though, once you lead with empathy, you're going to need them to know where you begin. You can start with empathy and understanding of their situation, but then you're going to want to let them know that this is where I land. So you might be saying something like, it's important for me that going forward, I need X, Y, or Z. You might say something like, as we get to know each other more, you should know this about me. After you have started that boundary conversation with a nurturing or empathy statement that acknowledges the other person and their perspective as much as you can honestly share that you know it, and then including a little bit about where you land, you're going to want to follow up with a natural consequence that comes with the boundary not being adhered to or respected. So it might be something like our relationship might have to change. I will be less available. We'll need to start putting things in writing if we continue to have these misunderstandings. I think a lot of times what happens in the boundary conversation is people think they need to armor up and wall off. And I think that's an intimidating place to set boundaries from because then it feels like you're going to war. But you can start to think about the things that go along with where you feel disrespected, where you feel people are stepping on your space and energy. What is your natural inclination once someone does that? Are you going to be pulling back? Are you going to make yourself less available? Are you going to wait before responding? There can be gentle or gentler responses than full walled up, armored up responses. And I would encourage you to start thinking about your own boundaries and your own natural consequences that come when someone steps on them. It's pretty likely that this is all fairly old news to you, that this isn't your first rodeo with any of this. And it's my thinking that the first obstacle toward consistent boundaries is your feelings or your confidence. The next obstacle is not knowing what to say or do. And then lastly, it's pretty likely you probably struggle with some follow through too. So let's tackle this one at a time. First, let's just talk about your feelings and get it all out there because boundary setting doesn't feel good. I think sometimes it's represented in social media as I am woman, hear me roar, and we're supposed to feel so good about it. But in actuality, it's pretty hard to do. For many of you, you might not get why you need to set boundaries on some people because the things that you have to tell people not to do would never occur to you to do to someone else. So it can be really baffling. Why do I even have to have this conversation? Why is this something that I even need to say? And you can't help but wonder why people aren't more thoughtful. What happens next is that the fact that people aren't thoughtful with you starts to feel personal, and we create these worthy stories about ourselves when other people step on us rather than rewriting our own stories of ourselves and declaring our worth by clearly naming and stating our own boundaries. Setting boundaries often leads to a fear of repercussions, responsibility, or increased conflict. We get so afraid of what's going to happen next after we say the hard thing that we find ourselves holding back, not speaking our truth, and not showing up for ourselves. That's why in the moment it's so much easier to say nothing as opposed to saying something. But that's a reminder of why we're here. Saying nothing doesn't work for you. Saying nothing makes you feel like crap. That's why you hit play on this episode. And you have proven this to yourself time and time again. Saying nothing, letting people walk all over you, letting people take advantage of you, doesn't decrease the amount of conflict you experience in your life. People who move through the world only considering themselves will simply pick something else. So, setting boundaries is an attempt at preserving our own self respect, of staking claim to who we are. We're giving ourselves permission to take up space. It's not going to be comfortable, especially at first, but as you get used to it, it does get easier with repetition. It's like any new movement or stretch. Just think about it for a second. You feel tight, you're uncoordinated, out of shape, and out of practice. But with each stretch, you can go deeper. You become more and more connected to yourself, more in tune with your own needs and your priorities. And with a deeper connection to yourself, the easier it is to set those boundaries. The other thing to consider here is that not saying something up until this point has come with a really heavy cost. You're carrying that weight around you through every interaction, through every day, through every hard decision, not showing up for yourself, not considering yourself, and not putting yourself first on your own list is a weight you have been dragging. And you're so used to dragging this dead weight and this feeling that comes with the repeated disrespect that you have no idea what it would be like if you just were able to remove that weight from your shoulders. Not carrying that weight of chronic disrespect and invisibility would be so freeing. It's something that would give you energy. And with that energy, you would have space for other things. You have no idea what your life could be like or what it will feel like to move through the world without that dead weight hanging onto you. It's the only way you've known how it feels to move through the world thus far. You have no idea what it would feel like if you just drop that weight. And the only way you know that, to see what you're capable of without that weight, to see what relationships could be like when you stand up for yourself, is to start betting on yourself and be willing to find out. Now, I know that this comes with guilt and shame and blame, and there is a way to manage those feelings. And the first thing you want to think about is naming them and stating them out loud and expecting them. Because, of course, if you have lived your whole life considering your mom, putting her first, not considering yourself, the first time you do something that goes against what she might approve of, the first time you choose yourself over her, that is going to feel wildly uncomfortable. You're going to feel bad. It might ping your conscience. It doesn't mean that your conscience is on point and that you're right to feel bad. It just means that you're used to feeling bad every single time you don't choose your mother and you choose yourself instead. So, a good way to combat that is to expect it, to know that it's going to happen, to say, my mom wanted to see me at 3 o'clock today, but you know what? I wanted to get errands done and I wanted to set myself up for the week. So she's going to be mad. She might even give me the silent treatment. She might blow up my phone. She might test my limit. But you know what? I really want to get my errands done and I don't want to be doing them late at night. And I don't want to feel like I'm rushed and going into my week in this frenetic way. Yeah, my mom is probably going to make me feel bad, but that's not a reason not to do it. And at some point, it won't always feel that bad. But when those guilty feelings come, those stories you tell yourself about misplaced responsibility, you can always say, hey, there you are, guilt. Hey, there you are, blame and shame. I knew you were going to come to this party. I know you're protecting me. I know you think you're telling me, hey, use caution here because if you don't do what your mom says, there's going to be conflict. That's okay. Thank you for protecting me. Because again, part of this is your trauma brain response. We've talked about that in earlier episodes. So you're going to expect that naming, blaming, shaming, guilty feeling, and you're going to say, I knew you were coming, but I'm all set. I don't need you now. Thanks for the heads up, but I've really got this. It's not being afraid of the guilt and shame, it's owning it and expecting it. And the more you move it and the more you direct it and the more you get in control of it, the less likely it's going to appear. Because that means on repeat, you're choosing your own well being, you're choosing your own priorities, you're putting yourself first. And when you do that on repeat, then you get used to that feeling because then on the other side, you see what it feels like to have the errands done at a reasonable hour, to have the evening free to spend with your own family. And then you realize that, yes, this is uncomfortable and yes, this is hard. But man, maybe it was a little bit worth it because I'm having a really nice night with my family. We don't always get to the good part of boundary setting. Boundaries are always painful, but sometimes we have to get to the other side of it and see and absorb what it feels like to have chosen ourselves to take advantage of that experience before setting a boundary is going to feel good. Now, I have to confess to you, this is my favorite part of this episode. I think if I had a dream job and it was a Googleable skill, something you can look up in Google, it would be giving people the words for hard conversations. In fact, I think it was like 2 years ago, I did an ebook and I did like simple scripts for saying hard things. And it was this idea of offering people words for the hard and awkward conversations in their life. And I think that setting boundaries certainly qualifies as one of those hard and awkward conversations in your life. And I think a lot of times, as I said a little bit earlier, the reason why we don't set boundaries is because we don't know what we're going to say or we can't figure out how to get the words to come out of our mouth. In a perfect world, I would be sitting with an inbox full of your questions, with your boundary situations that you're struggling with, the times that you're having a hard time making a decision, your own struggles telling someone no, or disappointing someone, or turning a no, turning a yes into a no. I really, at the heart of the show, hope that it grows to become an advice show where you write in with your questions and experiences, and I'm able to answer you, but we're just getting off the ground here. I'm new in this. The the inbox is still empty. So I thought, as a way of offering some sample scripts for boundary setting and to give you an idea of how to think about this, I would just give you a list of the most common situations that I hear in my own therapy practice with people, and offer you some sample scripts of ways of thinking about it and ways of talking about it to people that you have to set a limit with. Again, in the future, after this episode, if you want to write into me, Heather at daughtersnpd.com, with your situation, the thing you're trying to work out and work through, I will gladly return to this conversation and include it on a future episode of the show. So let's think about this for a second. One of the biggest ways people break boundaries is by invading your personal space. And that can look in all kinds of ways. It can mean actually standing too physically close to you, but sometimes it might be coming to your house unannounced, touching or moving your things or objects, standing too close to you, or even touching you without permission. And I think sometimes in those moments when somebody steps on us in that way and jumps in our space like that, we're so quick to give them the benefit of the doubt, to say, oh, it's just a hand on my shoulder. What am I so jumpy about? Or who cares that they picked up things off my bookshelf and looked at them? I'm being too sensitive. I invited them into our house. It's really easy to talk yourself out of being uncomfortable with things that actually make you uncomfortable. But again, think about when we start storing those examples, think about the dead weight that you add to that situation and that story. So here's a couple of ways you might be able to manage that. Say, for example, somebody comes to your house unannounced and it's a girlfriend of yours. And she's, hey, I just was at something down the street. I thought to text you. I thought to just say hi, but I just thought I'd surprise you and pop in. And I brought dessert. And, would you like to sit and chit chat for a little while? If you had already planned a night for yourself and you were going to snuggle in with a book or watch television or go to bed early, you might not want to see your girlfriend. And it could feel really awkward because in the moment, it's this idea that she's just coming by with dessert and she's being thoughtful. Why can't I just get over myself a little bit? And you start telling yourself that story and talking yourself out of it instead of saying, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for thinking of me. That's really kind. Unfortunately, I already made my plans for the evening. I've got a really busy day tomorrow. I've got to get to bed early. Or today was a really hard day. I'm super tired. I'm a little worried about my day tomorrow. I really wanted to spend some time prepping and getting my day organized. I really need to spend some time by myself. I so appreciate you thinking of me. You can always follow something like that with your plan B, with your rain check offer, to say, I can't now, but how about you come by tomorrow? Or how about you and I meet for coffee on Saturday? I think sometimes we think of boundaries as this be all and end all, and we have to be all armored up and firm and military style with it, rather than saying, this doesn't work for me, but something like this would. You're always welcome to acknowledge someone's good intention, that they can step on a boundary and still be really good people. Now, what happens if somebody does something where you're feeling physically uncomfortable because they've stood too close to you, or they're whispering in your ear at a party or something like that? You can always take a step back and say, hey, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thank you so much. Is it okay if I take a step back? I'm just feeling like I need more personal space. And I don't want you to take it personally. The way I move through the world, I need just a little bit more space between you and me. It's okay to be the one to step back, but you want to be the person who says, I am someone who needs more personal space, because we all have different metrics for that. And it's different for each of us. So you want to think about, what's the information you want to communicate? What do you want to say to somebody? What do you need them to know about the situation? And how can you do it in the most matter of fact way so you don't feel like you're blowing up their spot and that you're majorly offending them, but at the same time, you don't feel like you're letting someone walk all over you and you're not sucking it up and being uncomfortable when you don't have to be? Another time I hear a lot about boundary setting is when we're talking about emotional manipulation. In the narcissistic recovery space, all of us are a little too familiar with the term gaslighting, and that's when somebody takes our version of events and tells us it didn't happen that way and rewrites history and rewrites the narrative to make something all our fault or all of our misperception. Another way of emotionally manipulating somebody is to get you to do what's in the best interest of them, even if it's not in the best interest of you. And I think that in the moment, people know they're being emotionally manipulated because they feel it in their body, but they don't always know how to say it. And as soon as you say, hey, I think you're gaslighting me, or hey, I think you're emotionally manipulating me, they're going to say, no, that wasn't at all my intent. I don't know why you're being so sensitive. It's something that's so hard to prove. You know it when you feel it, but it's really like an intangible thing. And so I think a lot of times in the moment, what ends up happening is people, because they can't prove it, because they can't like physically observe it and say, ha, you did this, and this is inarguable, they talk themselves instead of ignoring it, of passing it by, of letting it go. And sometimes, and I know I do this myself, I tell myself I wasn't really manipulated because I knew they were manipulating me. And I just chose to go along with it instead of having the hard conversation, rather than acknowledging I didn't want to call out the manipulation. I didn't want to worry about having to prove myself, so I opted not to say anything. But yes, they end up getting away with it, even if the only thing they get away with is thinking that they successfully manipulated you. But here's the thing. I think that there's a lot of ways you can manage emotional manipulation or somebody trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do. And I think it's with clear communication. So if you're giving a version of events, if you're saying that somebody hurt your feelings, that you were really upset about something, or somebody was stressful, or a situation was stressful and somebody wants to rewrite that, or you want to stay home because you don't want to spend a lot of money and you're trying to save and a girlfriend wants you to go out and implies you're not prioritizing the friendship. There can be all these hidden meanings behind things. And again, these are all hypothetical, made up things. I'll do so much better with specific examples that you guys are struggling with and that are on your heart and mind. But in those moments when you think that somebody is trying to tell you something that isn't true and isn't your version of events, or is trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do, it's okay to say, I see that you see that from this perspective. I believe you that you see this conversation from that point of view. I acknowledge that. I just want you to know that's not the way I see it. That isn't my version of events. That's not how I experienced it. And if the conversation persists and continues, you can say, oh, I know we disagree, and it's okay that we disagree. I think sometimes in those boundary conversations, when people are trying to convince you of something or gaslight you about something or get you to do something and you say no, they continue the conversation with begging and pleading and trying to sway you to another side. And I think sometimes you could say, oh, I know you're disappointed. I know you were really hoping I'd say yes to that. I know it would be easier for you if I just acquiesced and went along with it. I'm just not comfortable doing it. And I know that probably starts an uncomfortable conversation for you or an uncomfortable situation for you. I think sometimes we are so nervous about managing the conflict that we forget that we don't actually have to pick the conflict up. We can say, oh, I know you disagree. I know you don't see it the same way. I know that we didn't experience that the same way. I'm okay with it. I understand. We can have two different versions of this event and we can have two different perspectives of it. I accept your perspective. I just can't change my behavior because of it. And that's when you get firm with the boundary. It's not something I can do right now. And unfortunately, I need to say no. There's a way of acknowledging the other person's perspective without continuing the conversation. So I would start thinking about ways you shut the conversation down by agreeing with their defense in a way. It neutralizes them. The other thing that'll sometimes get connected to emotional manipulation is invalidating your feelings. Oh, I wasn't making you mad. I wasn't trying to pick a fight. I wasn't antagonizing you or making fun of things that you find sad or overwhelming or stressful. I want to remind you of a power move here. It's, if I'm going to be honest, one of my most favorite tools to use in an argument. We want to remember in these moments when somebody is trying to argue with you about your experience or about your feelings, that your thoughts and your feelings are totally inarguable. That means if you tell someone you're disappointed, if you're hurt, or if you're angry, or you're upset, or you feel sad, depressed, or anxious, they can't tell you that you don't feel that way. Your thoughts and your feelings are completely inarguable. And when someone tries to make an argument out of your thoughts or feelings, it's totally okay to simply remind them of that. You don't get to tell me I'm not mad. You don't get to tell me that I'm not thinking what I'm thinking. My thoughts, my feelings are completely inarguable. A lot of times people will try to invalidate your feelings as a way of disarmoring you or taking away your argument or defending themselves. And you can get into this word salad war, for lack of better words, about what you're disappointed about or why you shouldn't be disappointed or what you're mad about or why you shouldn't be mad about something. To get out of that argument, to get out of that moment that's so intolerable and so uncomfortable, a real easy way of exiting stage left is to say, I know you wish I wasn't mad. I know you wish this didn't upset me. I know you don't want this conflict, or you don't want me thinking or feeling the way I am or experiencing you the way I do, but I am. And that's inarguable. So let's not have that conversation. I think it's really important to learn the strategies for disentangling ourselves from these really hard conversations, because I think people try to latch on to certain words or specific words in this aha, gotcha moment. But in reality, if somebody's trying to tell you you don't feel a certain way or you don't think a certain something, a good way of redirecting that conversation, of exiting out, is to simply remind them that your thoughts and your feelings aren't arguable. One of the next things that we see a lot in conversation in narcissistic abuse recovery is financial manipulation. The idea that oftentimes people who are in recovery are going to have to learn how to set financial boundaries with themselves and for themselves, because the narcissist in their life often gets really presumptuous about what they're entitled to, what they're owed, or what they deserve. And sometimes they can do a really good job of convincing you that you have some sort of financial burden in the relationship. My husband is not in contact with his mother. We've gone no contact in that relationship. She has a significant amount of mental illness. Not even sure that narcissism is one of them, but he has definitely been on the receiving end of a lot of financial expectations and financial manipulations over the years. I remember her coming to him at one point in time and saying, I paid for your braces. Like the parental job that she did when he was a teenager, she decided that we owed her money and that we should reimburse her for the braces that she paid for when he was a kid. We declined politely and said no. Those types of examples, those types of pressures where someone says, I did this for you, you need to pay me back, or I took on this expense, so now I need to be reimbursed, or because of the context of the relationship, you should be paying for this. Those arguments can really come with a side of guilt, a burdensome feeling of responsibility, and a lot of manipulation. It can be hard to see your way out of them. And I always believe in a good prevent defense. So the idea that I am not going to have to go to war with you, I am going to protect myself by preventing the argument from happening in the first place. So, what my husband and I learned to do in these situations is to plan ahead of time, like at the beginning of the year ahead of time, how much money we were willing to send her way on any given year. So, usually towards the end of the previous year, we would sit down and say, what's the mom budget for next year? And whatever that amount was, when she asked for money, we would just send money until she hit her limit. Once she hit her limit, we would then say, we've helped you and supported you for X number of dollars. We don't have any more in the budget to be able to help you any further. I'm sorry, we can't help. That got us out of the debate as to whether or not we should be paying her, sending money her way because she needed it for heating, or she needed it for food, or she needed it for medication. A lot of times, those debates would always come with a side of guilt, a burden of responsibility, wondering in our minds what the right thing to do was versus what our own personal boundaries were. Sometimes you do help someone out when they're having a hard time and you loan them $50 or you send $50 their way and you get some sort of feeling for helping them get through a moment. But in those instances, it never felt that way. And so we would just decide at the beginning of the year, we have X amount to give her. And after that, however we're going to say it, the answer is no. You can say you don't have the budget. You can say that you have other things or other people that you want to be able to help or contribute to or donate to that you're choosing to prioritize over her. You can come up with a lot of different ways of communicating that. What's most important is that you decide what your budget is in these situations, what your financial limits are, and that you don't cross those. And you might decide that your budget is $0, and that's okay. $0 is okay. And it's normal and expected for some people who have a lot of financial stresses and expectations in their own life that they can't always yield to or acquiesce to someone else's financial demands. So if your budget is zero, your budget's zero, and you say, I would really like to help. I understand you're in a bind. That's just not me right now, or that's not us this right now. You can come up with whatever you need to say, but it's so helpful if you have a plan ahead of time when you're dealing with somebody who's going to financially manipulate you, because you know that those basic core human needs might pull at your heartstrings just a little bit. And if you can get ahead of the argument by being prepared for yourself, I think that does set you up for better success. Sometimes people don't want your money, they want your time. They want you to spend more time with them than you might want. They might want more social time. They might want more volunteer time. A lot of people will come at you with a lot of different expectations for how they think you should be spending your time. And this isn't an issue that's just for narcissists. I think there's a lot of people who have no concept of the ask. Sometimes they have no idea how much time they're asking for when they make a request. But protecting your time is going to give you an increased sense of control over your life. So if someone in the PTA is asking you to volunteer to be classroom mom, if your mother is asking for more visits with the grandkids, if your boss is asking you to stay late because of a meeting, you want to be able to understand and know what your own boundaries are in terms of time. And then when someone is asking you for more time than you have to give, or more time than you're willing to give, again, I would keep your reason for saying no simple. People use your words and your explanations for no as fodder for disagreement, as a way to argue. So if you say to your boss, no, actually, I can't stay late tonight, I have to pick up my kids from daycare, they'll say something like, doesn't daycare have a fee that you can pay if you have to pick up late? Or can't somebody in your family pick up the kids? This meeting is really important. So as soon as you give them the reason for no, they then try to solve your reason for no so that it can become a yes for them. So instead you say, I know you really need me there. I know that it's making your life harder for me not to be there, but I can't. I won't be there. I understand if you don't understand, but unfortunately, I need to pass right now. If somebody wants you to be more social, it's the same thing to say, hey, I know this sounds like a great time to you. I know that this is something you really hope that I can offer you. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work for me. I've been pulled in 50 million different directions, and I'm saying no to all social plans going forward. You just say, I'm saying no. And again, your thoughts and feelings are inarguable. And when they push back on your reasoning or they push back on letting you know that it means a lot to them or that it's really important, again, like their thoughts, their feelings, they're inarguable as well. So you say, I know this is really disappointing. I know you're upset. I understand that this wasn't what you had planned and you had hoped for a different response. But unfortunately, I need to take a pass. Sometimes people are going to criticize you and they're going to belittle you and they're going to talk down to you. Sometimes you're going to see it coming because it's in the context of them disagreeing with you about a boundary you're setting. Sometimes it's going to come out of nowhere. And we often receive opinions that we haven't asked for, points of view that we are not looking to consider. I think sometimes we have to pay attention to what battles we're picking up. We don't want to pick up every battle. So sometimes we're going to roll our eyes, suck our teeth, but let the moment pass. Other times somebody's going to say, oh, are you sure you want to do that? Or I don't know what you're thinking with this, or that sounds like a mistake. And ignoring it, skipping over it, and not paying attention to it is just not going to work for you. So as a result, you're going to feel compelled to say something, to say, I know you look at my life and you wish I would make a different choice. I know that you look at this decision and you think it's risky. I know this isn't the way you would prioritize things in your life. I don't think you and I are going to come to an agreement on this. So you just need to accept that this is how I'm handling this, or this is the decision I'm making for myself in my own life. Again, you want to disarm her by saying, I know you disagree with me. I know this isn't what you would want for me. I know that this is causing you stress. I know that you're concerned about this. However, this is the decision I'm making. Again, the fewest number of words possible, the least number of excuses possible. Don't get yourself in a debate about the no. Just make your no really clear. I saw a great social media post the other day. If you're on Instagram and you like following other people who do coaching for trauma and relationships, I really recommend you check out Jillian Turecki. I believe that's spelled Turecki. If I remember, I'll put a link for her social profile in the show notes, but I might forget. In any case, I saw a post from her and she said that if you're an overgiver, be sure to build relationships with other givers because takers only know how to take. And very true. Truer words may never have been spoken. I do think that people who give a lot in relationships have this habit of building relationships with takers when we really should be focusing on building relationships with other givers. In any case, at some point in time, you're going to have to set a boundary with an overtaker in your life. And an easy way to do that is to let people know that you don't have the availability for more. You might be saying you don't have the financial ability, like we talked about. You might not have the time ability, but you might not have the mental or emotional capacity. And a lot of times people will keep taking or make presumptions around these things. And the best defense against overtaking is to stop overgiving. If it is not yours to give, if you don't have it, if you're tapped out, if your tank is empty, don't offer to help. Don't volunteer yourself. Don't say you can when you can't. But we also haven't covered that in enough podcast episodes to make not giving something that comes top of mind. Oftentimes, you're just going to be managing people who come at you with a lot of requests and getting used to saying no, keeping it clear, keeping your words short, keeping your answers brief will be a really good setup for success for you if you can just say, I don't have anything else, or that's all I was planning on doing today. This is as much time as I planned on spending today. This is as much as I can do. And just letting them know this is the limit. Again, avoid saying why, because why opens you up to debate. Why opens you up to criticism. And it just extends the conversation past the point of any comfort for you. So just keep it there. Say, I've done as much as I can today. This is as much time as I've been planning on spending it today. I understand it might be frustrating for you. I understand you might be hoping for more, but this is what I'm offering you today. One of the places I see this come up the most often is actually in emotional labor. That might be a new phrase for you. It's a new one for me to offer to people. But the idea that we run out of emotional capacity to hold people's stories, to be aware of people, to be paying attention to all of everybody's details, a lot of times we don't realize we're burdened, especially when it comes to friendships and close relationships. One of the things I had to do recently is to tell friends that I was getting close to tapping out and that I needed a break from everybody's emotional story. I'm a therapist. I have a podcast now talking about hard things. And it seemed all at once, all of my friends were also having struggles with hard things. It was a lot of emotional labor. I was finding myself overwhelmed trying to remember who I had checked in with, who I hadn't yet checked in with, what was going on in each person's life. And I realized I was losing track of my own life and my own work and things that were important to me. And so I told friends, like, hey, I understand you're having a hard time. I know you're going through some stuff. I need you to know that for the next couple of days, I'm going to pull back. I care about you. I care about what you're carrying. I care about the burdens that are on you. But right now, a lot of people in my life are burdened all at the same time. And I need to get that oxygen mask on me because I feel myself frying around the edges. I feel myself in my own free time kind of numbing out and tuning out because I can't take on anymore. It's not often that I do that. I've been in this field for longer than 20 years now. So I'm used to carrying a lot of emotional stories, and I'm usually pretty good at remembering everybody's details of knowing who has a meeting on what day, who has a stressful life event on which day. But I was just getting to the point where a lot of stressful things were adding up in my own life, and I was tapping out. And rather than stressing myself out and feeling like I had to be this superior friend and be super present and put on that pressure on myself, I just let friends know, hey, I know you're handling a lot right now. I'm just taking a couple of days to catch up with myself and then I'll come back. And it was so freeing for me. And my friends received it. At this point, I've done a really good job of collecting friends who understand and respect boundaries and are good at clear communication. But it is hard when you're the friend having the hard time to hear one of your people say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm at capacity right now. I can't. It's not an easy conversation. It was hard for me to say. It felt vulnerable even for me to say. But if you can manage your emotional labor and pay attention to how much is going out on any given day or any given week, it's a really good way of protecting yourself and your space and your peace. And I would encourage you to pay attention to just how much emotional labor you're giving out, and if perhaps you need to start reining that in for yourself and your well being. One of the things that I feel like we can't skip over in a conversation around boundaries is how do you have boundaries at work when your boss has expectations of you, tasks that they expect you to do, a job description attached to what you're doing? And how do you say no without being worried that you're going to seem insubordinate, look like you're not doing a good job, look like you're not being a team player, look like you're not carrying your weight? I think it's really hard at work to have boundaries. One of the things I would encourage you to do is to have in a neutral time and space. Again, I like the prevent defense. In neutral time and space, conversations with your supervisors and team members around what their boundaries are. I have found that the best way to have boundaries at work is by first checking in with other people's boundaries at work. To say something like to a supervisor, hey, I know we all have work email. I was wondering what your boundaries are around work emails, receiving work emails. If I'm catching up on something on a Saturday, should I wait to tell you about it until Monday? Would you prefer to have it in your inbox? What would you like to have and what works best for you? Or, hey, I know that sometimes I can work late. and you're not always able to, what time do you like getting out of the office? If you check in with people around their boundaries, around areas that they seem to be stepping on your own boundaries with, first of all, it's a good way to neutralize the conversation, to create understanding and acceptance, and neutralize the idea that, of course, people have boundaries at work. But then it's a really easy way to introduce your boundaries to say, oh, good, I'm so glad I asked, because I got to tell you, I really don't tend to check work email after 6 o'clock at night. I prefer to check the email at 8 in the morning. I like having the hour before work starts to check in on any changes or updates. But after 6 o'clock, it's me and my husband, or it's me and my kids, or it's me and whoever. You want to let people know where you stand. And a good way of doing that is by simply telling them where you stand, of saying, I would like to know what your limits are, what your time constraints are, what your availability preferences are, so that I can respect them. And I think it would be so good if you knew mine too, because then we start on an even playing field. I think you can keep the conversation clear and succinct, and then people know that you're expecting to respect their time when you're asking them to respect yours as well. If I could sum up all of these different examples and give them a common theme, I'd like to think that I'm giving you scripts and ways of communicating that help you protect your peace. Ultimately, when I think about boundaries, I think we're trying to protect our peace. The things that make us feel disrespected, the things that make us feel invisible or skipped over, disregarded, judged, blamed, shamed, stepped on, or ignored. All of those are the things that require our boundaries. But they're also the very things that disrupt our peace because we become uncomfortable. We start getting into a debate about what the right thing to do is, what the right decision is, what the right words are. And they distract us from the life we're trying to live. And they get in the way of feeling about ourselves and our lives the way we want to feel them. So, as you're in these situations and quagmires and messy conversations with people, and you find yourself unsure how to navigate, and you find yourself wishing for the perfect script for this exact situation, I would encourage you to ask yourself, what do I need in this situation that protects my peace? How can I protect my peace? Or why have I stopped feeling peaceful? If you can hone in on that and center in on that, my guess is the words will have an easier time finding you. I'm always going to want to know your situations and circumstances, and you're always going to be welcome to call into the show with a recorded voice memo or write into the show with an email over at heather@daughtersnpd.com, because I do think we get tripped up on certain situations or we don't know how to say certain things. But my guess is if you center yourself around the idea, I want to feel peaceful. What is it that I need to say right now to establish peace for myself or protect the peace that I've established? My guess is those words are going to find you. But sometimes we don't set boundaries, not because we don't know what to say, but because we don't know what the heck we're going to do when somebody crosses them. When we say, I actually would prefer it if you wouldn't X, Y, or Z, or I need you to stop offering opinions about A, B, or C. Sometimes we don't speak up about our boundaries, not because we don't know what to say and not because we're unsure that they're actually boundaries, but because we don't know what we're going to do when someone disrespects them, disregards them, or skips over them. So, what I'd like to help you do in our last kind of minutes together on the show today is to think about this in the same way that I've been having all the other conversations with you regarding boundaries today. That you're going to reference the conversation that you had if you had it. If you told somebody you weren't available in the evenings after 6 o'clock, you're going to say, hey, remember that conversation when I talked to you a couple of months ago about not being available after 6? I just need you to know that you calling me at 7:30 this evening just didn't work for me. I want you to know that I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't respond to the voicemail until today because, again, as a reminder, I'm not available after 6. You're going to remind people if there is a consequence, if there is a natural consequence to them stepping on the boundaries, you're going to say, I feel uncomfortable in these situations. When you say A, B, or C, I've tried to dodge over the conversation. I've tried skipping it. I just need you to know that I'm not going to respond to this, or I'm not participating in a conversation about my decision making process, or my values are not up for debate. When someone steps on your boundary after you have asked them not to, you just deliver the natural consequence that's consistent with that relationship. If someone is disrespecting your time and you have a trusted relationship with them, what do you naturally, relationally feel is the consequence for that? Do you need to make yourself less available next time? Do you need to let people know that you're feeling disrespected and you want to take some time away? What is your natural? Sometimes you're going to know when you set the boundary what the deal is. Like, if this keeps up, I don't know that we can be in relationship together, or I'm getting so many work emails that I'm not opening my work email until I'm back at work, or something like that. If you communicate the boundary, you're just going to remind them that you set it, and then you're going to follow through on the boundary. But if it's happening in real time, and again, it's feeling tricky and dicey, you're going to let them know the way this happened didn't work for me. So this is what I'm doing next. Again, avoid the why, avoid the reasoning. Just say, I felt disrespected, so I'm not going to that party. I know we had plans on Sunday. I'm going to opt out and take a pass on that, but perhaps we'll connect next time. You're just letting them know the decision you've made based on the boundary you've set, and you're not opening that conversation up for debate. I spent a lot of time in this podcast juggling hypothetical situations because I know that it's the words that trip you up, but I also wanted to really help you understand how I think about this inside this conversation. And I know you're going to have your own stories and your own situations. And again, you're always going to be able to write in with the show, and I'll offer you my perspective. I can't wait until you start writing into the show so I can offer you my perspective. But for now, I really want you thinking about protecting your peace, recognizing that your boundaries might be emotional, they might be physical, they might be financial, they might be time and calendar, attention, all of those things. Whatever your boundaries are, they are yours and they're okay to have. And I encourage you to have them. Whew. That was a lot. This was a whopper of an episode. I want to be really clear and transparent with you as I end it that I had a lot of struggles with my tech and with my recording as I was trying to record this. The sound may have been disrupted. You may have points of clarity where I might have dropped off a couple of times. I want you to know that I did my very best in the episode. Tech was against me. It wasn't recording when I thought I was recording. It recorded me twice a couple of times. I am working that out with the tech people. But in the meantime, if this was a disrupted episode for you, if it wasn't the quality you've come to expect from me, I just want you to know that I'm aware of it. I did my best. And my boundary on it was that I was not starting over. So I did my best with the time and tools that I had. Thank you for sticking it out with me. Thank you for continuing this conversation with me, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye for now. I really appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or follow it on your favorite podcast app. If you know another woman who needs this show and its conversation in her life, I really do hope you'll consider sharing it with her. Your feedback's going to help me build the show into what we need it to be. I'd really, sincerely, truly love to hear from you. You can also find me and connect with me over on Instagram at DaughtersNPD. Until next time, take care of you and know that I'm in it with you. Thanks for listening to Mother Mayhem. Bye for now.